And now the man of the hour, David Coombs, Bradley Manning's defense attorney. This is his first public presentation. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserves. He's done 12 years of active duty. He's been practicing and teaching criminal law for 15 years, and he's highly respected by his peers and colleagues. As I said, this is the first public presentation that David Coombs is making, and we'll be taking a few questions from the press, not from the audience, but from the press after his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Coombs.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the turnout here, and especially the turnout by the press. Thank you for that. As many of you know, I have not participated in any public events before today. I also avoid any interviews with the media. And it was and still is my belief that Bradley Manning deserves an attorney that is focused on what is happening in the courtroom and only what is happening in the courtroom. And that is why I have chosen not to do media interviews at this point. But today, however, marks a milestone, and it was actually supposed to be an ending point, really, to the motions hearings that we were going through. And it would mark the end of the motions phase, working our way into the trial phase. And the motion that we were doing, and unfortunately still are, is the unlawful pretrial punishment motion. And it's taken longer than expected, but I must tell you, I'm not really that disappointed by that. I'm enjoying my opportunity to cross-examine those who had Bradley Manning in those conditions for 9 months. As I take an opportunity, though, to reflect on the last 2 years, I think it's fitting that we're here today at the end of the motion phase with a motion that really brought the world's attention to this case, and that was how Bradley Manning was being treated. Brad's treatment at Quantico will forever be etched, I believe, in our nation's history as a disgraceful moment in time. Not only was it stupid and counterproductive, it was criminal. An entire group of individuals who I no doubt are honorable men and women chose to turn a blind eye to how Bradley was being treated. Those who could affect change did not. They were more concerned about how the attention might be put on them if something happened to Brad, as opposed to what was their conduct doing to Brad. But it turns out those same people cared about something more. And what they turned out to care about more was the media impact. And for that, I must thank each and every one of you here today. I must thank each and every one who is listening or watching, because without you, change would not have happened. Your actions resulted in Brad being moved from Quantico to Fort Leavenworth. Make no mistake about that. And with your actions, the draconian conditions that he lived under for 9 months came to an end. The magical waters of Fort Leavenworth apparently healed him, and he was no longer required to live in the conditions that he was in. Now, we all know Brad cannot be here tonight, but he knows tonight is happening. And he wanted me to personally thank each and every one of you. Thank you for taking the time to write to him, for signing petitions, for attending marches, rallies, and other public events. Thank you for writing to the military and to our government, complaining about his conditions. Thank you for donating to his legal defense, for volunteering at Courage to Resist and the Bradley Manning Support Network. But most of all, he wanted me to thank you for caring about him. The battle that we have waged for the last 2 years could not have been fought without your help. And it has been a hard fight so far. We are currently at over 450 appellate exhibits in this case, and that amounts to just over 20,000 pages of written motions and attachments. I am confident by the time this case comes to a conclusion, the record of trial will be the longest record of trial in our military's history. And that record will reflect one thing, that we fought at every turn, at every opportunity, and we fought to ensure that Brad received a fair trial. Now, my office website can keep track of a few things, and I want to share some numbers with you that I am personally, happy to see. And that is over 764,000 people to date have gone and read at least something about Brad on my webpage. We've received over 72,000 pieces of mail for Brad since his beginning in confinement. Over 14,000 individuals have donated to either Courage to Resist or the Bradley Manning Defense Fund, and 754 supporters have donated directly to his legal defense fund managed by my office. And today, I want to take the opportunity to thank you. Thank you for getting involved. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy life, not only to be here today and to listen to what I'm saying, but thank you for caring about Brad. Thank you. When I'm in the courtroom, I stand up and I look to my right, and I see the United States government. The United States government with all of its resources, all of its personnel. I see them standing against me and Brad. And I have to admit to you, that can be rather intimidating. And I was intimidated, especially when the President of the United States says, your client broke the law. Especially when Congress members say, your client deserves the death penalty. I want to tell you, though, today, as I stand here, I'm no longer intimidated. I am not intimidated because when I stand up, I know I'm not standing alone. I know I'm not alone because I turn around and I see the support behind me. I see members here today in the audience that are there every time we have a court hearing. I see what I'm going to affectionately call the Truth Battalion. Those who wear nothing but they wear other things, but they wear a black shirt. It has the word truth on it. And they're behind me. And when I look there, I know that I also have unlimited personnel and unlimited resources. But perhaps the best evidence for me that I am not standing alone when I stand for Brad is a website called IamBradleyManning.org. I personally have to tell you, I go to this site at least once a day. I go to the site when I need to recharge my batteries after working a long day on the case, and I just peruse the photographs. People with a simple statement in front of their face. I am Bradley Manning. It's amazing the power of those simple words. What those words mean to each individual, I do not know. But I want to take a moment to share with you what that may mean to Brad. During our countless conversations, I had an opportunity to talk to him about his future. And I said, Brad, what do you want to do when this eventually comes to an end? And he told me that his dream would be to go to college, to get a degree. And as a young man, at that time he was 23, that makes sense. We all know that college degrees are pretty much the ticket to a productive future. So I asked Brad, well, with that degree, what do you plan on doing? And he said, I want to go into public service. And I asked him what he meant by that. He said, I want to join some sort of campaign group, go into public service, and perhaps one day run for public office. And I asked Brad, why would he want to do that? And he said, I want to make a difference. I want to make a difference in this world. I can tell you that standing here today, I hope that someday soon Brad can go to college. I hope someday soon he can, in fact, go into public service. But I am confident, as I stand here today, that Brad doesn't have to worry about making a difference in this world. He has made a difference. Last Tuesday, the President of the United States signed into law the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. As President Obama was signing this bill into law, Brad and I were in a courtroom for the start of his unlawful pretrial punishment motion. How can you reconcile the two? I don't know the answer to that question. One of our nation's most famous whistleblowers, Daniel Ellsberg, has on multiple occasions spoken out for Brad. History has been the ultimate judge of his courage and sacrifice. History has judged him well. I hope that history will judge Private First Class Bradley Manning in a similar light. I thank you for coming here today, and I thank you for listening to me.
We have some questions from the press.
Now, I'm not promising answers to any of these.
And I'm sure if members of the media have some more questions, or if you didn't get your question on an index card, you can, and it'll be passed to the front. The first one is a two-part question. In your opinion, what sort of person is Bradley Manning, and what is his state of mind?
Well, I think Bradley is probably one of the more intelligent people I've ever met. Brad has the ability, I think, to talk about a wide range of topics. He's a young man, obviously, though, and with that, he has limited experiences. But Brad does a lot of things really kind of from the heart. He tends to care a lot about people, and so his conduct and his actions are usually driven by that. As far as his mental state, or how he is being, I guess, of a mind today, I can tell you that he is very excited about having his case go forward in the process now. It's been a long time. And he's also, at this point, very encouraged by the way the proceedings are going. I think he feels good about his defense. At least I hope he does. And at this point, I believe he's confident that things will hopefully turn out okay for him.
What can ordinary citizens do to help Bradley Manning?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to make sure that this case doesn't get lost in the minutia of everything else going on in this world. It is by far the most important military case, but it's a case that has significance for all of us. Because in this country, in the country that I am proud to serve in the United States Army Reserve now, we live in a country that is built on freedom of speech, live in a country that's built on government accountability and informed citizens. So I think at this point, the biggest thing you can do is stay involved, to stay informed, and to make sure those that you've elected into public office understand your views.
Have you perceived any difference in the way he's being treated in court as time goes on?
I have not. I mean, I think Bradley is treated professionally in court. A military court-martial is, in my opinion, the best courtroom you can go into. I practice both in state and federal. And I know anyone who doesn't have experience with the military justice system may view it with a suspicious eye. But from my perspective, it is by far the best courtroom for Bradley to be in.
How do your experiences in the military and in civilian life inform how you approach courts-martial generally, and this case specifically?
That actually is a good follow-up to what I was just saying. A lot of people would look at the military justice system and say, this seems to be very foreign to me. You have an officer and enlisted type panel, if you go with a panel, that's selected by the person who's convened the court-martial. You have a military judge that is in the military, and there's some suspicion that that person may be subject to some influence. And so when you look at it from the outside, you could see and perhaps think that the system is built to obtain a certain outcome. I can tell you with confidence, again, having practiced both in state and federal and in military practice, that a court-martial is by far the fairest justice system that I've ever practiced in. And that may sound confusing, and I actually get some looks of, I don't know about that. But let me tell you why. Military judges are not just picked out at random, they're not voted in. A military judge is somebody who has done, in most instances, both acted as a prosecutor and as a defense counsel for a period of time, has seen both sides. Also, that person usually has taken on the role of a chief of military justice, which would be the equivalent of a DA, or a senior defense counsel. And so from that perspective, you have a lot of experience. Once the judge becomes a judge, usually that person is a lieutenant colonel or a colonel. People who go that route are not interested in becoming generals. And so you've kind of tapped out at the top of where you would want to be. So there is no influence issue. And you have somebody there that is truly experienced, who truly understands the law. And from my perspective, I would take a judge who knows the law and is very experienced over many of the judges I practiced in state and federal. And then from a panel standpoint, if you go with a panel, almost everybody in the military, once they have obtained a certain rank, has some sort of college degree. And I think that in and of itself kind of speaks volumes about the person's ability to at least have an open mind on certain topics. And so we normally refer to military panels as blue ribbon panels. They represent, in many cases, individuals with at least a bachelor's, if not a master's or a doctorate degree. And so that may be surprising to some, but again, the panels that I've practiced in front of have always been fair panels. I might not have agreed with their outcome, but I do believe they took their job seriously. With regards to state juries I practice in front of, it's not always the case that you get an open-minded jury. So, again, for those who look to this and say, I wish you were in some other venue, I can tell you that Bradley's in the best venue possible for him.
Okay, this is sort of related to that question. How do you find that outsiders of either military service or civilian life generally perceive the other?
Well, I think I might have answered that question. I can tell you that if you do, in fact, look at the rights, and this is more when I taught military law to non-military attorneys, we would compare the various rights that you have in a state or a federal court against the rights that you have in a military court. And in every instance, the military court rights exceed that you would have as a normal citizen in state or federal court. So I think this is an issue in which a lot of times the suspicion, once you're informed, doesn't bear out. You start to believe that this is a very fair system. The suspicion, I think, though, of the military justice system is because, in some regards, it's foreign, obviously. But never forget that the military is made up of basically our sons and daughters, husbands, wives, fathers and mothers, just like yourself. And it is in my mind, it's not a perfect system, but it is one of the best systems that I've had the opportunity to practice in front of.
This may be the same kind of question. You see what you think. What do you take with you most from your military service and your time in civilian life?
I think military service, I can tell you a little background story about me. I was on active duty as a major. I just went through a course that would have ultimately put me on the track of lieutenant colonel and then taking the bench as a military judge. And then I met my lovely wife, who we met at a new law professors conference, not the kind of a geeky way of meeting your spouse. But we met there, and she changed my priorities. And she's a law professor, so at least in our family, she is the smartest one, and I know that. And so what we ultimately decided was I would hitch my cart to her star. And so that's what I did, and that's why I got out of the military, at least from the active duty standpoint. And when I got out, it was probably one of the worst times you could go out on the job market. And so I couldn't find a job. Even though I got towards the last rounds of job interviews, I was never selected. I was in an area where I didn't know people, and that's pretty much how you could find a job, by being known. So I decided to hang out my own shingle and go into state and federal practice, and then ultimately start my military practice. And I'll tell you that what I take to the military practice and what I think helps serve me well and my clients is a lot of the people that I see in the military are former students of mine when I taught, or they've come up through the ranks with me and I know them. And so at least in that system, you have the ability to sit down at a table with somebody and have a little bit of experience about them and know them and be able to talk to them and hopefully obtain, positive outcomes for clients. But for me now, going into this case, obviously this has been a 2-year in the making case. And the people that I'm working against are Some of them are former students. The relationships that we have, obviously, in this case, are adversarial, but I can tell that, and you see it in the courtroom, they're working hard for their side, and they believe in what they're doing. I think what I bring most into this situation is I have a familiarity with the system and the terminology. If anyone sits in the courtroom, you hear a lot of acronyms. You hear a lot of phrases that if you weren't a military attorney, that would be very difficult to even follow the conversation, let alone represent your client in a zealous manner. So I think that's the experience I bring is not only being known, but also just being familiar with the system.
Can you explain what's going on with the change of dates? His trial is now changed from starting on February 4th to March 16th. Why is that?
Yeah, the trial date has moved a couple times to the right, and a lot of times that is due to motions that are being argued. Some of the motions are unplanned, and they become issues only when we see, a particular piece of evidence. In this instance, we've got some issues that we're litigating that if the defense receives a particular ruling will require a delay in the proceedings of about 2 weeks. If we don't receive that ruling, then the calendar will move back to the left a couple of weeks. So in this instance, it's all driven really by a few of the motions, although as I started my speech and my remarks here today, we're nearing the end of the motions phase, and we really are transferring towards the trial phase at this point.
One of the charges is aiding the enemy. How great a threat do you think that charge is to the press and to whistleblowers in the age of the Internet?
Yeah, I'll remove this from this case. So I will just say that this is why I think it is a very important case for everybody, because when you look at the offense of aiding the enemy and take it out of this case and just simply say, if you can possibly aid the enemy by giving information to the press with no intent that information land in the hands of the enemy, and by that mere action alone you can be found to have aided the enemy, that's a scary proposition. Right there, that would silence a lot of critics of our government, and that's what makes our government great, in that we foster that criticism. And oftentimes, when it's deserved, we make changes. So this is a very serious offense, not only for my client, but I think for anybody in America to be paying attention to what it means to aid the enemy. So again, I think it's something that hopefully means something more than just giving information to the press.
Bradley Manning stated last week that he didn't want his case tried in the press. Does he and do you feel the public and press have accurately represented what's happened?
Well, I'll just answer that from my perspective. And as I said to begin with, this public appearance is the exception for me. I believe that trying the case in the press is not the way to do representation of a client. And Brad, at least from what he testified in the open hearing, didn't want his case to be tried in the press either. Because that was his wishes early on, but also because my perspective is you shouldn't try your case in the press. I respected his wishes, and I didn't grant interviews. And even after this day, I won't be granting interviews. And the reason why, again, is because your focus has to be on your client and not on, basically putting out facts to spin something your way in the press when that doesn't achieve anything in the courtroom. When you're in the courtroom, that's what matters. What happens there matters. In the press, as I said here today, what really matters is you, the public, being involved and being informed. And the press can do wonderful things. That's why I'm happy to see them here today. And that's what really resulted in Brad being moved, in my opinion, from Quantico to Fort Leavenworth.
Are you and your client able to communicate freely on a privileged basis?
Yes, Brad and I speak at least once a week, if not more. And we see each other quite often as well. Our communications are always privileged. They're never subject to any sort of recording or being monitored by anyone. And so because of that, I act basically as kind of the conduit for Brad, giving him information and helping him stay in touch and informed. So those communications are not subject to monitoring.
Final question, although I think you've pretty much covered this. Do you feel the judge has so far been fair to your client, and does Bradley Manning feel that way as well?
Well, yeah, okay. I can't, that's a loaded question there, but I will say, yeah, no, I won't say that. What I would say is this, that when I look up to the bench and I see a judge that knows the law, that is always prepared, that seems to be 2 steps ahead of the counsel, then I'm comforted by that. And for me, at least, that makes me work harder. That makes me fear being in the courtroom and not being prepared. And so in this case, I would say we have a judge that's exactly like that. So if to the extent that Michael saw some good advocacy in the courtroom, I can tell you that was because I would not want to see the judge look at me in a way that says, how dare you come into my courtroom and not be prepared? And so here, I'm very happy with the judge that we have and her knowledge and expertise.
Okay. That's the end of the questions for David Coombs. Thank you. Let's say thank you to David Coombs.